If you were looking for easy success, if you were someone who cannot tolerate patience, discipline, and waiting, if you believe that success, money, or a better life will simply fall into your hands without effort, then this video is not for you. You can leave right now, because what you are about to hear will not comfort you. It will not entertain you. It will challenge everything you think you know about success. What I am sharing in this video is not something you will find on mainstream motivational channels or viral short clips. This is not surface level advice. This is not recycled inspiration. This is a deeper understanding built from patterns, principles, and lessons observed across years of studying discipline, behavior, and the mindset of people who actually build long-term success. Not theories, not trends, but real principles that repeat across high performers in every field. And now that everyone who is waiting for easy success, shortcuts, and instant results has already left, we begin. There is a moment in every human life when everything becomes clear, not because the world suddenly changes, but because you finally understand that it never will change for you. Not unless you change first. Most people spend their entire lives waiting for motivation, waiting for clarity, waiting for the perfect time when everything feels right. But that moment never comes, and deep down, they know it. Yet they continue to wait as if time itself will eventually reward patience alone. But time does not reward patience. Time rewards action. And action is the one thing most people avoid. Because action demands responsibility. It demands discomfort. It demands that you step into a version of yourself that does not yet feel familiar. And the mind resists unfamiliarity more than anything else. This is why most people remain exactly where they are. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack opportunity, but because they are trapped in cycles of comfort disguised as safety. They call it stability. They call it routine. They call it being realistic. But in reality, it is hesitation dressed as logic. And hesitation has a cost that is invisible at first, a cost that does not show up in a single moment, but accumulates slowly over years, like compound interest working against you instead of for you. Every day you delay action, you are not standing still. You are moving backward relative to the life you could have built. And the most dangerous part is that it feels normal. You wake up, you repeat what you did yesterday, you consume the same distractions, you think the same thoughts, and you convince yourself that tomorrow will be different even though nothing in your behavior suggests it will be. This is how years disappear without notice, not through catastrophe, but through repetition. And repetition is powerful. It can either build you or quietly destroy your potential. The difference is not what you know, it is what you do repeatedly when no one is watching. There is a version of you that already knows this, deep down, beyond logic, beyond excuses. There is a part of you that understands you are capable of more. But knowing is not enough, because knowledge without execution is just entertainment. It feels meaningful, but produces nothing. This is where most people get stuck. They consume ideas about success, discipline, mindset, and wealth. They feel inspired for a moment. They even believe they are changing. But nothing in their daily behavior shifts. And without behavioral change, nothing changes at all. Your life is not shaped by what you think occasionally. It is shaped by what you repeat consistently. And consistency is never loud. It is not dramatic. It does not feel powerful in the moment. In fact, most of the actions that shape your future feel small, boring, and insignificant while you are doing them. But that is exactly why they work. Because success is not built in emotional peaks. It is built in ordinary repetition. The problem is that most people underestimate the power of ordinary days. They believe transformation should feel intense, noticeable, almost cinematic. But real transformation is almost invisible while it is happening. You do not notice it day by day. You only notice it when enough time has passed to reveal the distance between who you were and who you became. And by then, it is already too late to ignore it. That is why the question is never whether change is possible. The question is whether you are willing to endure the uncomfortable gap between who you are now and who you are trying to become. Because that gap is where most people quit. Not at the beginning, not at the end, but in the middle, where progress feels slow and results are not yet visible. This is where discipline becomes more important than motivation. Motivation is temporary. Discipline is structural. Motivation reacts to emotion. Discipline overrides it. And if you rely on motivation, you will only act when it is convenient. But convenience never builds anything meaningful. Everything meaningful is built in moments when you do not feel like doing it, but you do it anyway. That is the first real separation between people who grow and people who remain the same. And once you understand this, something important changes. You stop asking how to feel motivated, and you start asking how to become consistent. Because consistency is what turns potential into reality. Not talent, not luck, not timing, consistency. And consistency always starts small. So small that it feels irrelevant at first. But that is how every meaningful system begins. A small decision repeated enough times becomes an identity. An identity is what ultimately determines your life. If you see yourself as someone who gives up easily, you will act accordingly. If you see yourself as someone who follows through, your behavior will align with that belief. So the real question is not what you want. The real question is who you are becoming through your daily actions. Because your future is not something you enter randomly, it is something you construct through repetition. And every repetition is a vote for the type of person you will become. That means even your smallest decisions are not small at all. They are signals, they are direction, they are momentum. And momentum, once built, becomes extremely difficult to stop. But the same is also true in reverse. Lack of action builds a different kind of momentum, a quiet one, a slow one, but just as powerful. And if left unchecked, it becomes a life that feels stuck, not because you are trapped, but because you have been practicing stillness for too long. That is why awareness alone is not enough. You must interrupt the pattern. And interruption always begins with a single decision that goes against your current identity. Not a perfect decision, not a dramatic one, just a different one. Because different decisions, repeated consistently, create different lives. And that is where everything begins to shift. Everything changes the moment you realize that your life is not controlled by big decisions, it is controlled by small ones, repeated over and over again, until they quietly shape the direction of everything you experience. Most people look for transformation in dramatic moments. They expect a breakthrough, a sign, a sudden shift in circumstances that finally pushes them forward. But life rarely works that way. Real transformation is almost invisible while it is happening. It does not announce itself. It does not feel powerful. It does not come with certainty. It comes in quiet choices that feel insignificant at the time. The decision to work when you feel tired, the decision to think instead of escape, the decision to continue when nothing around you is giving feedback that you are improving. These are the moments that matter, because your future is not built in motivation. It is built in resistance, and resistance is always present. It shows up every time you try to change your habits, your mindset, or your direction in life. It shows up in the form of doubt, distraction, and discomfort. Most people interpret resistance as a sign to stop, but in reality, resistance is a sign that you are moving in a different direction than your current identity. And identity does not change easily, it fights back. It tries to pull you into old patterns, familiar behaviors, and predictable outcomes. Not because it wants to harm you, but because familiarity feels safe to the brain, even when it is limiting. This is why change feels difficult at first, not because the actions themselves are impossible, but because you are acting against an internal system that prefers stability over growth. But here is what most people never understand. You do not need to eliminate resistance. You only need to outlast it, because resistance is temporary, but repetition is permanent. If you continue long enough, resistance weakens, not because it disappears, but because it loses influence over your behavior, and at that point, something important happens. What once required effort begins to feel natural, and what once felt difficult becomes automatic. That is the moment where change becomes identity, and identity is where real transformation lives. Not in goals, not in plans, not in intentions, but in the type of person you become through repeated action. This is why discipline is not about force, it is about alignment. It is about choosing actions that match the future version of yourself, even when your current emotions disagree. Because emotions are temporary. Identity is structural, and if you wait for emotions to align, you will never move consistently. But if you act based on identity, emotions eventually follow. This is one of the most misunderstood principles of personal growth. People think they need to feel ready before they act, but readiness is not a feeling, it is a result. You become ready through action, not before it. And every action you take either reinforces your current identity or begins to replace it. There is no neutral ground. You are either reinforcing the version of yourself that stays stuck, or you are building the version of yourself that moves forward. Even when progress feels slow, it is still progress. Even when results are invisible, something is still changing beneath the surface. Because growth is cumulative, it builds quietly, layer by layer, until one day the difference becomes undeniable. And when that moment comes, people around you may call it sudden success, but you will know it was never sudden. It was built in silence, long before anyone noticed. That is the nature of real change. It rewards patience, not intensity. It rewards consistency, not emotion. And the people who understand this are the ones who eventually separate themselves from the rest, not because they are more talented, not because they are more intelligent, but because they stayed consistent long after motivation disappeared. And that is the real test. Not starting, not planning, but continuing when nothing feels exciting anymore. Because excitement fades, but discipline remains, and discipline is what carries you through the period where nothing seems to be working. This is where most people quit, not because they failed, but because they expected progress to feel faster than it actually is. But success does not move at the speed of emotion, it moves at the speed of repetition, and repetition always requires patience. If you can learn to stay consistent in the absence of immediate reward, you will eventually enter a phase where everything begins to compound in your favor. And when that happens, life starts to shift in ways that feel almost unfair to those who never persisted. But it is not unfair, it is delayed consequence, the result of every decision you made when no one was watching. So the real question is not whether you are capable of change. The real question is whether you are willing to stay in the process long enough for change to become visible. Because the process is where everything is decided, not the goal, not the outcome, the process. And if you master the process, the outcome becomes inevitable. That is the truth most people never fully accept. They chase results while ignoring the system that produces them. But once you understand the system, everything becomes simpler. You stop chasing motivation. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You stop hoping for external change, and you start building internal structure, one decision at a time, one repetition at a time, until eventually you are no longer the same person who started.